Okay, it says that we are live. This time it says 6 seconds. So for the hello, friends and family, brothers and sisters on YouTube world, we have the pleasure of bringing Scott Ritter back. In my opinion, the best military analyst. Scott Ritter is a former Marine intelligence officer who served as a chief inspector for the United Nations in Iraq, leading the search for Iraq's prescribed weapons of mass destructions. He has testified before the U.S. Congress, NATO, and the parliaments of several nations, and he's also the author of 9 books. So we want to say thank you to Scott Ritter from Real True Talk and Angry Warhawk.
Well,
Welcome,
thank you for
Scott.
having me.
Yes, sir.
Don't call me
Um,
sir. Remember, I'm a civilian now, so we all outrank all those guys that are officers.
yes, sir. uh, I'm going to come out with I have a question. My first question is, what are the social ramifications of the U.S. secret support for Nazism in the Ukraine and the correlation between Jim Crow and the Nazi Germany coexisting with Crow Regiment, pre-existing and surviving 20 plus years after without any sufficient overhauling of its banishment from our society?
Wow. Boom. Straight up. That's a serious question. And I'm not belittling it, but this goes well beyond military analysis, which I'm really, really comfortable with. And this gets into social analysis, about the societal analysis and things of that nature. And I'm not as comfortable with that, so I'm going to avoid maybe going down the rabbit hole a little bit, because what happens is, like everybody else, I have opinions, and like everybody else, sometimes my opinions are very strongly held, and like everybody else, when opinions that are strongly held aren't linked to a sound factual basis, you end up alienating just about everybody in the world who might know something about that, or say you're wrong. So I'm going to be careful here, because although I'm familiar with Jim Crow laws and things of that nature, I can't call myself an expert on it. What I will say is this, just from a fundamental basis, the United States claims to stand for something. Now we've been evolving as a nation since our founding. And I think most people who study Constitution and the constitutional law, everybody quotes the Federalist Papers and stuff, rightly so. I mean, that is the foundation of the thinking behind the Constitution. But we have to acknowledge it was an imperfect document. I mean, from the start. Otherwise, we wouldn't need so many amendments to fix it. But that's the beauty of the thing, is that it's a document that is able to grow. Fact is, if you just have the Constitution without the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, it's a pretty lousy document, because it doesn't protect rights. It doesn't. It enshrines slavery, the institution of slavery. It's a compromise document, like anything. When you take, the level of divisiveness that existed in colonial America, the problems that manifested themselves during the initial Articles of Confederation, and trying to turn this into something that could function, as a nation state, compromises had to be made. So the Constitution was a compromise document. The Bill of Rights came on afterwards and fixed it a little bit. But even after the Bill of Rights, we still had slavery. Women didn't have the right to vote. And it's a document that seems to be designed to empower the haves and control the have-nots. But we've been working on it as a society. I think we've recognized over the years the imperfection of our country. And we are striving to get better. And so I think today, while we're not a perfect country, there's still rampant racism. There's still economic inequalities. There's still I mean, just there's a whole bunch of problems out there. We know what we want to be. I think we know which direction we want to head. Um, and that direction cannot be associated with the resurrection of Jim Crow laws. It cannot be associated with the legitimization of Nazi ideology. Um, I mean, we can bring up Prescott Bush. We can bring up everything when we want to talk about the links between the United States and the rise of Nazi Germany and all that. That's history, and as I said, I'm not prepared right now to get into an in-depth discussion of that. What I can say is that most Americans today would say what we did back then was wrong, morally wrong, reprehensible, and not in keeping with what we claim to be as a nation. And so when I take a look at um, some of the policies that we are embarking on as a nation, including especially this support, this blind support we give to Ukraine, it's disturbing because under no circumstances can anybody, um, drawing upon fact, articulate a case that makes Ukraine as a nation worthy of the support of the American people. Ukraine is the antithesis of what we stand for as a people. Ukraine is purely a product of propaganda. It ignores reality, um, and it's bankrupting the United States, not just fiscally. It's not just undermining our military, um, our national security interests, but it's bankrupting us morally because it's aligning us with an ideology that we supposedly fought a war to eliminate, and yet here we are today promoting it, reinforcing it. You know, back in 1944, Henry Morgenthau was the Secretary of the Treasury for Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he rightfully, I say, said Germany can no longer be allowed to exist as a nation state. We've allowed, Germany two chances. They got two strikes against them, where they combined militarism with industrialism to create nations that ended up posing existential threats to the world. And they were defeated both times. And so the idea was we're not going to give them a third chance. We're going to break this thing up. We're going to deindustrialize Germany. Um, and we're going to basically make it incapable of ever replicating what it was. But that plan didn't work. I mean, we got into Cold War politics. The Marshall Plan needed German industrial capacity in order to become viable. So instead of eliminating German industry, we helped revive it and get it back in place. The reason why I bring this up is the Germans just recently made a decision under American pressure to provide Leopard tanks to Ukraine. So I want people to let that sink in for a second. Germany is providing tanks to a Nazi regime to kill Russians. They've learned nothing. And the company that's doing that, Rheinmetall AG, is headquartered in Dusseldorf, which is the sort of the epicenter of the area we call the Ruhr area. And that was specifically singled out by Morgenthau to be deindustrialized, all industry to just be dismantled, mines to be collapsed, nothing. It will never again be involved in industry. And the other part of it is that the people that worked in these factories were to be dispersed. They wouldn't be allowed to be concentrated. Germany could not be trusted with this kind of industry. And Germany has proven Morgenthau correct. Today, Rheinmetall AG is producing the Leopard tank. They're behind, they're enthusiastically talking about sending German tanks to Ukraine to kill Russians. I wish Henry Morgenthau was alive today, and I wish we'd enact that. Germany doesn't have a right to exist as a modern nation state, given its history and what it's doing today. They used to have a guy named Willy Brandt who talked about never again, meaning not just never again is Germany going to kill the Jews, but never again is Germany allow itself to manifest itself in a manner which conducts these kind of aggressive policies. German weapons will not be sent into conflict zones. He received a Nobel Peace Prize for this. He must be rolling in his grave today for what Germany has become. So Yeah, I got off on a little tangent there, but I'm about as anti-Nazi as you can get, and this sickens me what Germany is doing at our behest, by the way.
Can't hear you.
Sorry, I was muted. Okay, I have my own questions I was going to ask, but after hearing that question, I was wondering if I could ask a question off the back of that question, in that if I could play sort of devil's advocate in the sense that how much choice does Germany, or the German government, should I say, have in this, in the sense that they've been pressured by Washington through various means that we don't know what goes on behind the scenes into sending tanks to Russia? Because I don't think the German people are that enthusiastic about that. So in terms of how much independence does the German state really have? I mean, this is, if it wasn't for Washington, I don't think they would be sending these tanks. I mean, that's my take on it. I mean, so yeah, how much independence?
I mean, ultimately, every German man has to look himself in the mirror and say, am I a man or am I something else? And every German has to look themselves in the mirror and say, am I a German, a citizen of a sovereign nation, or am I just an American, colonial subject? I have no sympathy for Germany when they say, oh, we're under pressure from America. Grow up. Stand for something. I mean, this is a nation that has allowed itself. It's a cuckold nation. Okay, literally, these are cooks. And I mean that in the worst possible way that word can be used. They know that their economic growth and strength was derived in extraordinary fashion from the availability of cheap Russian gas. And that cheap Russian gas is what made Germany economically viable. And they allowed the United States, under false pretense, to infect their minds so that German gas or Russian gas was no longer deemed to be good. This is a nation that claims to want to be all about green power. And therefore, you need to get gas to replace the coal, so you don't have to have nuclear, all this kind of, stuff going on. And yet they let the United States blow up the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines, and they did nothing about it. I mean, literally the definition of a cuckold. They did nothing about it. They let the United States run all over them. And now they're letting America destroy whatever's left of their moral fiber as a nation. With all due respect to the German people, get the hell out of your house and onto the street if you don't like this. Otherwise, you're just the good German of 1936 that watched Adolf Hitler become chancellor and went, well, I mean, he won't be around long, so we'll control him. Scholz just basically came up with a new policy, the watershed policy. There's a German term I can't remember, Zeitenwelt or something like that, but it's a watershed moment. Well, gosh, the burning of the Reichstag was a watershed moment too, and it led to the empowerment of Adolf Hitler. Now we have the empowerment of Scholz, and the Greens are sort of this, this wolf in sheep's clothing. The Green Party 2021 manifesto, where they ran, and that's how they got Annabella Baerbock to be the foreign minister. Oh, we're the green people. I mean, I used to protest in the streets against nuclear war and all this kind of stuff. And yet now you're proudly proclaiming the fact that Germany's at war with Russia. Let me remind you, Annabella, you want to know what a German war with Russia looks like? Go outside the Bundestag and look at the Tiergarten War Memorial. 2 T-34 tanks parked right there, reminding you that Russia kicked your butt. Rightfully so, because you're evil. You manifested yourself as a force of evil that had to be destroyed by a coalition of nations, including the United States and the Soviet Union, to destroy your evilness. And those tanks are there as a constant reminder of what happens. And if you don't watch out, they're going to be upgraded to T-90 tanks, because that's what Germany deserves. No second chances. It's over. I have no sympathy for Germany. I hope Russian tanks roll through them, collapse the country, and dismember it. That Russia follows through where America failed. We should have implemented the Morgenthau Plan. We failed to do so, and now Germany's rising their head back up. They're ugly, neo-Nazi affiliated, hate-filled, murderous, misanthropic head. That's what Germany is becoming. If the German people say, no, that's not us, then get in the streets. Get in the streets. Throw them out of power. Oh, we can't. The police. Overrun the police. Revolution. If you believe in something. In America, we believe that we couldn't allow the British monarchy to come in and dictate to us. Taxation without representation was deemed to be reprehensible. We didn't like British troops coming into our houses and taking over our homes. So we rose up in a rebellion. We liberated ourselves from what we felt to be the tyranny of British colonialism. So Germany, don't tell me we don't agree with it. Because if you do nothing, you agree with it. Being passive, doing nothing means it's okay. We're going to let it happen. You become complicit to the problem. And Schultz is Adolf Hitler brought back to life. Literally. And if you let this continue, remember this, Rheinmetall AG, the people who produced the Leopard tank, they produced tanks during World War II. They used slave labor. And if you think, well, they regret this, they resent this, go on their website and read the history of Rheinmetall from 1936 to 45, Adolf Hitler's time. They don't say that, they just say 36 to 45. And oh my God, they make it look like the slave laborers were great. I mean, it was so good. I had an opportunity, I got to draw, and then they took me out and I got to draw portraits of the French slave laborers, and it wasn't that bad. Wasn't that bad? You were slave laborers in a military camp where they beat you to death. Not that bad. And Rheinmetall never paid a price. You know what the price you should pay if you're a company uses slave labor to build weapons for the Nazi war machine is? Total annihilation. That plant should have been leveled from the ground, and it should be leveled today, because sending the Leopard tank to Ukraine to kill Russians is the exact same thing as sending, gosh, the Germans have this thing about naming their tanks after cats, panthers, and tigers. And now we're sending leopards. Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed.
Juan, did you want to do your question next again, or?
Sure. Go ahead, Angry Warhawk. Since that was a follow-up to my question, go ahead.
Okay. Right. So my next question is, okay, does NATO have the capacity to supply Ukraine with all the military hardware, weapons, and supplies that Kiev needs to defeat Russia, or at least prevent any further territorial losses? In other words, could the Ukraine win this war if NATO really wanted them to?
No. Ukraine can't win this war. First of all, let's just talk about first principles. This is a war of existential survival for Russia. Russia's fighting this war because NATO sought to carve Ukraine out of the Russian sphere of influence in a concerted effort to undermine Russia, destroy Russia, etc. Russia has nuclear weapons. So Russia will not lose this war, or the world will end. Let's just start with that first principle. So anybody who says we can beat Russia, no, you can't. Because Russia's willing to use nuclear weapons to stay alive. Russia will not allow itself to be defeated, because a Russian defeat means the end of Russia. And nuclear weapons sort of exist to prevent that outcome. So right off the bat, unless the West is saying that we all want to commit suicide for Ukraine, Ukraine cannot win this war, because Russia will do that which it takes to win. But it doesn't matter. Russia's winning. You know, we could give Ukraine all the tanks in the world, line them up, 1 million tanks. Give them 1 million tanks. Line them up. Ukraine had a military when this war began at 700,000. They're down to a little bit more than 200,000. They're running out of men. I've been saying all along they've been taking casualties. And only now people are starting to, I'm no idiot. I don't make numbers up. I've got this little computer thing. One of the reasons why I was a good intelligence officer is because I could look at a situation and assimilate the data and crunch the numbers and go, I think I know what the outcome is going to be. Now, Scott, you thought they were going to take over Ukraine in 7 days. Well, my God, I thought they were going to operate doctrinally. I didn't realize they're going to go in with a hand tied behind their back, jumping on one foot, singing Kumbaya, because no one thought of a special military operation except the Russians. And they had every right to do so. I understand why they did it. I understand all that stuff. But had they come in doctrinally, the war would have been over in 1 week. Because the Russians doctrinally can't be beat by anything either Ukraine or NATO can put up in front of them. But the other thing is, once they settled down, the battlefield became a known. I sat there and I said, the Ukrainians, and I said this back in June, I said the Ukrainians lost about 250,000 guys dead. And everybody went, no, that's too high, man. That's too high. Well, they're up over 300,000 now. It's acknowledged. Stratfor came out with a number. They said 305. I think the number's closer to 350. It's approaching 400,000 dead.
KIA.
Dead.
Not
KIA, killed in action, buried under the ground, or left rotting in the fields. There are so many Ukrainian bodies out there that haven't been collected yet. I mean, they're going to be spending decades digging these guys out. That's just the reality of it. They don't have anybody left. They've taken about 70,000 troops and they've sent them off to Great Britain. We just saw airplanes land and discharge. Ukrainian tankers are going to be trained on the Challenger 2 tank. You know what I called them coming down the plane? Dead man walking. None of them are going to live. They better hope they never go to combat in the Challenger 2. They will all die. Every single one of them will die. That's what happens when you get hit by rounds that are designed, intended to cut through the Challenger 2. The British, what kind of stupidity do they think here? You think the Russians haven't been studying the Challenger 2 tank since the moment you conceived it in your minds? That the second you fielded it, the Russians went, how do we kill that? And they said, well, we'll use this round out of our 122 millimeter tank. We think we got that one answered. We've got anti-tank missiles that we have designed for it. The British now have superb secrecy. The Britons never, ever had Russian intelligence penetrate your defense secrets. You don't think that the Russians know exactly what Chobham armor is or whatever the follow-on is that you employed on Challenger. They got it. They got it in spades, and they designed the weapons to destroy it. The same thing with the M1. They know everything, just like we know everything. That's why we know that they can destroy our tanks. And yet we're sitting here somehow thinking that 14 Challenger 2 tanks are going to have an impact on the battlefield. Who came up with that math? 14. I mean, it's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. They got 70,000 guys out there getting trained right now. They got a little over 200,000 on the front. Now, again, I asked people, if you recall, when NATO said we're going to send tens of billions of dollars to Ukraine back in May, I said, this is a game changer. Because what it's going to do is give Ukraine a chance to absorb technology and then use it against an overextended Russian force. The Russians went in with too few troops, 200,000 troops, and they had frontages that were unsustainable with those number of troops. 200,000 troops on a 1,000 kilometer front means you have 200 people per kilometer, except you don't have 200 people per kilometer because most of those 200,000 aren't frontline combat troops. They're used in logistics, supply, communications, etc. And they're spread out all over. You have about 60 to 80,000 troops on that, which means 60 to 80 guys per kilometer. If you're lucky, that ain't enough. And it wasn't enough. What happened when the Ukrainians came in and massed 30, 40,000 guys? They punched through the lines. They got in the rear area. They disrupted. I just told you Ukraine has 200,000 troops. A lot of them are up right now trying to defend Kiev against the threat of a Russian attack coming out of Belarus. A lot of them are up along the border with Belarus in case there's a threat there. They may have 140,000 troops along the front. But remember, some of those troops have to be deployed in the rear areas, etc. The Ukrainians are in the same situation that the Russians were in. Too few troops, too great a frontage. And what are the Russians doing? First of all, in Bakhmut, they're grinding them down. This battle's been ongoing since May. The Ukrainians have lost anywhere from 14 to 20 brigades worth of troops. That's 5,000 troops per brigade, 90% casualty rate. Just add the numbers up if you want. Now, what the Russians are doing is the Ukrainians have said, we're just going to keep doubling down on stupid. We're going to keep throwing these brigades in. And Russia went, good. Let's hit them in Zaporizhia. Now the Russians are advancing towards Zaporizhia. And the Ukrainians are like, holy cow. So they have to divert whatever reserves they have back to fight in Zaporizhia. Then the Ukrainians go, or the Russians say, let's go up to Uligar. Let's start an offensive up there. Let's go Krasnye Limon. Let's do some stuff up there too. and they're pressing the whole front before they've even committed their reserves. This is just what they have on the front line. They're pressing. And the Ukrainians are taking whatever reserves they have and they're throwing them out there, and they got nothing left. That's why they're running around taking guys out of their homes, picking people off the streets. They are desperate for manpower. They're begging Europe, all those brave Ukrainian heroes that fled Ukraine and are living as refugees. Ukraine's saying, send them back, guys. We need them. We need manpower in front because we got nobody left. Nothing. And at some point in time, the Russians are going to fire the green flare, and the main element is going to move towards the forward edge of the battle area, cross the line of departure, and it's all she wrote. So no, there's nothing. There's literally nothing that NATO or the United States can do short of directly intervening. But they don't have any troops. I mean, the United States got 100,000 troops in Europe, but we know what they are: Stryker Brigade, Suicide Brigade, the 101st Airborne. Light infantry ain't going to live long. A couple heavy armor brigades, they'll do right for a couple of days, and they'll run out of ammunition, run out of fuel, run out of reserves, run out of sustainability, and they'll all die. So what is NATO going to put up against the Russians right now? Nothing. This war is won. Game, set, match, Russia. Zelensky sort of acknowledged that. He came out, the president of Ukraine came out and said, I need those 31 Abrams. Those 31 Abrams. Again, game-changing numbers we're talking about here, guys. I'll be as sarcastic as possible. But he said, I need those Abrams by August, or it's too late. What does he mean too late? Are you trying to tell me something, Mr. President? That if you don't have the American tanks by August, it's too late for what? A Ukrainian victory? Why? Because you know what's about to happen. You know that the Russians are going to start this process of grinding you down, and you've got no reserves left. And by August, it's all over. And that's just the statement of fact. That's a reality. That's what we're dealing with here. Now, the Russians should screw this up. I mean, we all know that any general, any army can totally just make mistakes, and Russia has shown a proclivity for making mistakes. I think Russia has learned from those mistakes. I don't think they're going to repeat the same error. I think one of the reasons why it's taken so long from September until now is that Russia not only has mobilized, but it is training them in the lessons learned from this fight. So, I'm pretty confident in my assessment.
Okay. My next question is, what do you think about the controlled implosion of the global community to usher in a new world order?
I don't know if it's a controlled implosion. I mean, there's some theories out there that the United States has deliberately set up Germany for failure. That we recognize Germany as and this is in cahoots with the British, that Germany was the industrial powerhouse behind the European Union, and the European Union was seeking to become a competitor with the United States and Great Britain, who's now withdrawn from the European Union, and that all that's happening right now in terms of the sanctioning of Russia, energy, etc., is one big conspiracy to bring down Europe. I don't think so. I'm just not a fan of conspiracy theories. I believe in stupidity. And I believe that the American policy and the European policy is based upon stupidity, ignorance, arrogance, hubris, but not the intelligence necessary to carry off a very complicated conspiracy. What I also believe in is that bad policy gets trumped by good policy almost every time. And it's bad policy for the United States to continue to believe that they are the singular force around which the world should rotate. It's good policy to understand that the world has grown up. They don't want to be the 30-year-old in mommy's basement anymore. They want to get out and they want to live on their own. And so India, China, Russia are saying, no, we're big people now. We get to sit at the table. We get to make our own decisions. It's a multipolar world. That's good policy. We have bad policy. And good policy will beat bad policy every time because, you just have logic, reasoning, and the force of history on your side. So, I don't think it's a controlled implosion. I think basically We have a world that's out of control. It's like a wildfire. It's burning, and then we got a whole bunch of hotshot crews. We'll call the non-American clique. The Americans are the arsonists. They're running around throwing matches, trying to start fires. And we got the rest of the world running around like hotshot crews trying to contain it and stop the fire. It's really crazy right now, but I believe that the world is going to contain the fire, stop the fire, put the fire out, and take over.
All right. My next question actually ties into a question I just saw in the chat. The question I saw in the chat was, nuclear disarmament only makes sense. No, sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. Yeah, Elena USA asked, in the reduction in nuclear weapons, I wonder what he thinks, what Scott thinks, if having nuclear weapons protects Russia from annihilation. So the question I had that kind of ties into that is, if Russia didn't have nuclear weapons, would NATO be carpet bombing Russia?
If Russia didn't have any nuclear weapons, we wouldn't be having this discussion. Russia wouldn't exist. It would have ceased to exist a long time ago. The only thing that has kept Russia viable up until now is its nuclear deterrence. And the United States has engaged in a very aggressive policy since the collapse of the Soviet Union to dismember Russia. And we've had to do sort of the indirect approach, especially after Yeltsin disappeared and Putin came in. We couldn't do the direct approach anymore, so we've been doing it indirectly. And but the thing that prevents direct action against Russia is the fact that Russia has nuclear weapons, and if we attack Russia directly, then Russia will wipe us out. Russians aren't suicidal, though. The last thing Russia wants is a nuclear war, because Russia knows that's the end of it. I mean, you can't have a people as proud as the Russians are, who talk about their culture, their history, their heritage, their religion, their faith, their unity with the land. I mean, the concept of the soil is, homeland is very important. And people that have that kind of character aren't prone to saying, screw it, let's just nuke everything. So the Russians have a very responsible nuclear policy, but it's one that has to fly in the face of what appears to be a suicidal tendency on the part of the West. At one point in time, we in the Soviets recognized that nuclear weapons and nuclear war can't be won. And so what we did is we came up with this notion called mutually assured destruction. If you use nuclear weapons against us, we use them against you. We all die. Therefore, we're not going to use them. And then we started to implement arms control designed to lower the threshold of the potential of risk of inadvertent nuclear war. But the United States has walked away from all of this arms control infrastructure. And we are pursuing policies now that seek to give us a strategic advantage. Now, in that light, why would Russia ever engage in arms control with us? If the purpose of the United States for arms control is to sit down at the table and gain unilateral advantage through an unfair treaty, why would Russia ever participate in that? And the answer is Russia won't. But here's the danger, and Russia understands this, that if we take away these treaties, even something that, like the New START Treaty, which is unfair to Russia, the United States has been cheating the whole time. Ask anybody about B-52H counting mechanisms, or how we demilitarize Trident submarines by not demilitarizing them. We're liars. We are literally liars. We can't be trusted. But that treaty does contain and provide a mechanism of inspection that gives some sort of insight into each other's nuclear forces. It creates some level of confidence that the other side's not cheating. When you remove that and you don't have inspectors going in, no one knows anything for certain. And I have to tell you, intelligence, especially in the arms control business, is an imperfect science. Anybody who thinks, we got all the satellites and everything in the world, we can see everything, we can't. We're not that good. Neither are the Russians. And you don't want to be in a situation where we begin to Yeah, I know, Serge. Thank you, but I think Russia would like to reconsider the Morgenthau plan. Um, talk to Maria Zakharova and what she thinks about that now. Um, the, uh, nuclear weapons right now, if it gets out of control, can become very dangerous because there's a lot of people in America who actually believe that we can develop through superior technology a legitimate first strike capability, one where we can go in and decapitate Russia's leadership and Russia's weaponry, etc. Um, we can't. I mean, I don't know how it's if that it hasn't sunk in. The Russians have something called the dead hand perimeter, which is designed basically to allow Russia to launch its nuclear weapons, even if its leadership is decapitated in the event of a first strike. Everything will be launched, and unless the United States specifically can target every aspect of perimeter and nullify it, and it can't. So we need arms control. I know there's a lot of people out there. It makes, and Russia needs arms control. It doesn't mean that Russia will get in the business of going down to nuclear zero anytime soon. Not at all. But Russia needs to ensure that the American nuclear enterprise is contained. That's the important part of arms control. Russia needs to contain the American nuclear. The greatest threat to international security is the United States of America's nuclear arsenal, because we're totally irresponsible with how we've built this up, how we seek to employ it. We're the only ones that have right now a nuclear posture that allows preemptive first strike using nuclear weapons in a non-nuclear environment. We are literally the worst country in the world. And the only way to control us is through arms control. And so we need Russia. Unfortunately, we ask us so much of Russia. We need Russia once again to be the adult in the room. The adult in the room who has to tolerate the temper tantrums of the Americans and the Europeans, because the consequences of not trying to contain this are catastrophic for Russia. And remember, the Russians love their country. They don't want their country to turn into a nuclear wasteland. They're not going to allow somebody to come in and take their country, but they don't want it to turn into a nuclear. Americans seem to be very happy about embracing policies that can bring about nuclear, because somehow we're led to believe that we can have 3 or 4 cities get hit, but it won't be our cities. I mean, if you live in Denver, you say, well, it's going to be LA. If you live in LA, you say it's going to be San Francisco. What kind of insanity has to exist for people to say it's okay to lose a city or 2 or 3 and we can win a nuclear war that way? We can't win a nuclear war that way. We lose automatically. So we need the Russians. We need arms control, and we need the Russians to be a party to arms control. It's going to be it's a very big ask, though.
And thank you for answering that question on the live chat.
Oh, sorry, I get distracted sometimes when I see those.
Okay, I can't remember. Is it my turn or your turn?
Yes, it's your turn.
It is my turn. Okay. All right. So we've done that one. Okay. So next question. Okay. Who is really calling the shots in Washington? Because we know it's not Biden and Harris or any of these other people that we see visibly. I know there's a deep state. People say, oh, conspiracy, but there's people that are pulling the strings behind the scenes. So in your opinion, Scott, who really controls Washington?
Well, let's just ask the following question. How do you become a congressman or a senator or a governor? I mean, take a look at the paths to power of most American, national level politicians, presidents, vice presidents, etc. They all start, they all go down to base. It's very rare that you get a Donald Trump who just comes down the escalator and says, I'm running for president because I'm Donald Trump and I've had a talk show and I've got money and I'm this and that. That's the exception, not the rule. The rule is you start by basically subordinating yourselves to the establishment. The establishment's been around forever. The establishment is industry. The establishment is, political sources of power. It's money, 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 money. That's what it's all about, money. How you can raise money, sustain money, and that money is attached to ideas, and those ideas are attached to money-making possibilities, because money is power. So by the time you get to the top, you got to the top not because you got the greatest ideas in the world. You got to the top because you've sold out. You are literally the biggest sellout in the history of the world. Sorry, if you're elected to high office, I can just look you right in the face and say you sold out. You sold out a long time ago. You stand for nothing except money and more money. That's it. Every single one of them. There's not an exception. Bernie Sanders sold out a long time ago. AOC, she's selling out right now. They have all sold out, every single one of them. They stand for nothing except political power attached to money. So who's calling the shots? The people that put them in. The special interests call the shots. Is there a star chamber? No, it's not that easy. The deep state is more of a concept than it is a structured reality. But the deep state is basically the power that exists in an unelected fashion that influences everything we do. And so, Joe Biden can't enact policy on his own without alienating the deep state. All policy has to be worked up through the deep state, and then Biden is simply the mouthpiece that sells the policy. Now, the deep state has certain factions. There are, differences of opinion on the left wing and the right wing, but generally speaking, the deep state has a moderate center that seeks to mitigate the extremism of both left and right, and create this constant direction forward, which is about making money for the political and economic elites. That's all it's about. It's not about us, we the people of the United States of America. We don't count. We'd like to believe we do, but we don't. We are not the establishment. We should be, but we're not. And the only way to change this is money. You got to take money out of politics. But since the establishment is in control, the deep state's in control of how policy is made, I can't imagine them committing suicide on their own by saying, yeah, we're going to go with that. We are going to take money out of politics. This is all going to be about a battle of ideas where everybody's equal, and we can have people who aren't subordinated to millionaires running against somebody who is, and let them debate fairly without control of the media, etc. But no, there's a deep state. There's no doubt about it.
Okay, Scott, my next question is, I don't know if you heard, but I read on the Pravda, RU, that America, the United States is being, there's warships, Russia and China warships in Alaska, East Coast and the West Coast, and then there's like 200,000 Russian soldiers in Nicaragua. So it just seems like they're surrounding us. So have you seen or heard anything about that? About the warships?
200,000 Russians in Nicaragua?
Yeah, that's what the report says.
Yeah, I don't think so. Russia just recently signed legislation approved by their president to expand the Russian military to 1.5 million. So somebody's trying to make a case that Russia's deployed more than 10% of that capability into Nicaragua. I'd say you're insane. How'd they get there? How are they being sustained? No. Look, there's no doubt that Russia and China are seeking to do unto us as we do unto them. We are constantly tickling the periphery of their respective zones of influence. We do insane things like take B-52s and fly them down the Black Sea towards Russia, simulated a nuclear strike only to pull away at the last second. But the Russians are looking at not knowing it. Is this it? Here they come. Are they going to go? I mean, are they going to fire? Get ready, guys. They did away. Before this war, we used to do those missions over Ukraine. You want to know how stupid that is? We fly B-52s over Ukraine, heading like we're going to strike Moscow before we move away. I wonder how many Americans know about that. And if they do know about it, do you really support that kind of irresponsible action? It's insane what we're doing. So what's happening is the Russians and the Chinese are starting to tickle us like we tickle them. The thing is, neither Russia nor China have the ability to project power the way they are. Why is that number 200,000 ridiculous? Anybody who is involved in the global war on terror understands what it took to deploy 100,000 Americans into Iraq and sustain that, or even more than that, in Afghanistan. The logistical sustainability of that was a nightmare. And so somebody's trying to tell me the Russians snuck in 200,000 troops in Nicaragua. Where's the lifeline, baby? Or maybe the Russians are just going to eat bananas and go local. I don't know. But no, the Russians don't have the ability to project power globally like the United States does. If they have troops in Nicaragua, I would imagine that number would be less than 2,000. But even 2,000 would be significant. That's difficult to sustain. They might have some advisors. But Russia is not a country that overextends itself, meaning that if they're going to make a decision to deploy any sort of military advisory group, it's got to be attached to a policy that's got to be attached to a design, what they want to accomplish. They're not just going to take 2,000 troops and throw them in Nicaragua and leave them there. There's got to be part of a logical policy direction. And I don't see Russia right now involved in trying to challenge the Monroe Doctrine in a meaningful fashion. This isn't the Soviet Union back in the 1970s and 80s. This is different.
Okay, next question. My next question is about the F-35. Is the F-35 this over-engineered hunk of junk that some people say, or is it the future of warfare? Like, is one F-35 going to take out Russia and completely win the war single-handedly? What's the can you give us your take on this super advanced aircraft?
If you listen to the proponents of the F-35, they'll tell you it's literally a game-changing technology. That the F-35 is comprised of a whole suite of technologies that go from stealth to advanced maneuverability, the ability to use near artificial intelligence to acquire targets, assign weapon systems, to take out a multitude of targets at the same time, to communicate with other F-35s so that they can do some fancy dance in the sky and shoot everything down and win the war all by themselves. And then you can talk to people who know anything about the F-35, and they'll tell you that it just doesn't work. It doesn't work as intended. It has a multitude of problems that it will basically break when you look at it. So even if the F-35 functioned as designed, getting it off the ground and to fly a combat mission and come back without having to be grounded to be repaired is virtually an impossible task. We don't have enough of them to be able to put 60% of them on the ground in maintenance stand down while the other 40% fly and try to cycle planes through. And it's just overhyped. I mean, the fact of the matter is, an Su-34 can probably shoot down an F-35 in a stand-up fight, one-on-one, just because it can outmaneuver it. The F-35 doesn't work as intended. And the pilots sometimes don't know how it's going to perform when they ask it to perform. Whereas the Su-34 is it's not a spectacular plane, but it's a good airplane. It can do the job. And I think anybody who knows when you're drag racing, you'd rather have the car that you know is going to start every time, and when you hit the accelerator, it's going to accelerate, and the steering is going to work, and the brakes are going to work, everything. Or do you want to be in the thing that you don't know? You start it, it's going to blow up. Hit the acceleration, is it going to blow up? If you drive down, the steering going to break, and you're going to crash. That's the F-35. You have no idea what the F-35 is going to do when we use it in combat.
So has it never been used in actual combat?
My dogs are barking, so I was trying to keep them out of the conversation, but here they are. So welcome.
Hi, Maverick.
Yep, Maverick is singing his song, and he's joined by Machismo, the little Chihuahua. So the mailman just showed up, so I think I might have gotten a package.
Good
But
boy, Maverick.
yeah, Maverick. He's either loved or hated. I was on Judge Napolitano's show, and I think the judge still likes me, but we had a person come to the house who I don't think realized I was on a podcast, and he just stood there, and Maverick doesn't like this person. So Maverick is just going berserk, and there's nothing I can do because it's like, here, I'm talking to you guys, and I mean, what do you want me to do? Get up and, so maybe I should have just hit pause, said, let me solve this problem. But Maverick barked throughout the entire show, and I got a lot of hate mail on that one. I told him to pound sand because Maverick's my dog, and dogs do what dogs do. And if you guys don't want me, if you don't want to hear Maverick, don't invite me on the podcast. I mean, that's the bomb. I'll tell that to your audience right now. If you don't like my dog, leave. I mean, or tell these guys never to invite me again. But I do my best to try and control the dog, but he's my best friend, and I cut him a lot of slack. Anyways, back to where we were going on this before Maverick.
I think Angry Warhol was asking a question, a follow-up.
Yeah, it was just
about the F-35. Yeah.
Yeah, has it ever actually been used in live combat?
It's never been used in air-to-air combat, which is supposed to be its forte. I do believe that the F-35 has been involved in flying maybe some combat air patrols and maybe delivering some air-to-ground ordnance. But it's never. There's no F-35 aces out there. Let's put it that way. But if it gets used in combat, there might be some Su-34 aces out there.
So it's never been fully tested to its full potential, right? Okay.
Not in combat. People will say that what we do out in Nevada with red flag or whatever they call it nowadays is, combat-like. But even then, the F-35 has never been able to perform to its full potential because it just doesn't work.
Yeah. Okay. Juan, do you have any more questions?
I'm going to pick a couple of questions from the comment, but you can go ahead until Scott tells us he has to go.
Sure. There's a few. I've seen a few questions in the comments, so let's go through those. I'll ask my next question.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, so if Russia fails to invade and occupy the whole of Ukraine, will 1 second. Yeah, so if they fail to take the entire country, will whatever is left join NATO and be used immediately as another springboard to antagonize or attack Russia with? In other words, will they just find themselves fighting just another smaller Ukraine, but that is part of NATO?
Well, I mean, first of all, how is Ukraine going to join NATO? I mean, it would be it would require NATO to literally violate everything it ever stands for. Nations that have ongoing territorial disputes can't join NATO because the second they join, NATO's at war because Article 5 will be automatically triggered. And I can't see responsible nations saying, yeah, we're ready to die, because a war with Russia means nuclear conflict. So I don't see any scenario that has NATO or has Ukraine, whatever left with joining NATO. The danger is to have a surviving Ukraine that's full of hate, governed by people who hate Russians, who continue to be supported by NATO for a perpetual conflict, something of that nature. That's the danger. And I think Russia recognizes that. That's why Russia's stated objectives are twofold: demilitarization and denazification. Denazification means getting rid of a regime that supports this anti-Russian policy direction that the current Ukrainian government does. Can this be done without fully occupying Ukraine? Well, I think Russia would like to believe it can. That's why Russia is part of whatever future offensive appears to be being planned, seems to be incorporating a standalone strategic air campaign component, similar to what the United States did to Iraq back in Desert Storm in 1990. And General Armageddon, General Surovikin, is in charge of this. This is the man who shut down the Ukrainian energy sector. And I think this is the man whose intention it is to collapse Ukraine as a modern nation state. And that's how I think this war is going to be solved politically. I think that Ukraine is going to be pounded into submission, that they will be targeted in a way that just breaks down Ukrainian society's ability to sustain itself, and that this will result in the political collapse of the Zelensky government, and whoever replaces Zelensky will be suing for peace based upon the terms of Russia, which includes the delegitimizing Stepan Bandera's ideology and the extreme Ukrainian nationalism. Now, people can rightfully bring out the fact that we've never won a war by air power alone like that. I mean, the idea was, we're going to bomb the Germans into submission. That didn't work. We had to put boots on the ground all the way to Berlin, and it was Soviet boots. Other people will say that Japan didn't finally capitulate until we dropped 2 atomic bombs on them. I actually tended to disagree with that one. I think history shows that the Japanese were suing for peace independent of that. But in that, one of the reasons why they're suing for peace is because what was happening with the strategic air campaign, the B-29 is just flying over Japan, leveling cities with firebombs. We didn't have to nuke them. The Japanese had lost the will, and it was also we were sinking their. It's a part of the war that a lot of people understand, but our submarine fleet was taking out their merchant navy. Japan was literally not able to bring in the supplies they needed to continue to survive. And I think Russia is going to impose that sort of air war on Ukraine, and the damage will be extensive, and that's what is going to cause the collapse. And whatever government takes over is going to work with the Russians to ensure that whatever survives as Ukraine isn't going to be this cancer that's waiting to inflict more harm. It'll become what Russia has always wanted it to be, which is part of the Russian sphere of influence, oriented towards Moscow, working in concert with Moscow, and not with the West.
Yeah, Japan was finished before the nukes. The nukes were dropped to warn and scare the Soviet Union.
Soviet Union, yeah. No, we know that. I mean, a lot of Americans don't know that, but
no, that's not what we're told at school. That's not what we're taught, but that is the real reason. So.
Yeah. Now, people just have to study, John McCloy and the conversations he had with the Truman administration, and the conversations that were held by Forrestal and others. And if you study the totality of the documents, you know that the real reason was to send a signal to the Soviet Union that we had something they didn't have, and because there was worries after Yalta that we had given away too much to the Soviets in terms of post-war Europe, and the idea was to try and put pressure on them in the lead up to Potsdam and beyond. But I mean, what the heck? It's only a couple 100,000 Japanese. Who cares? They're just little yellow men. When we're talking about the white race, like America, was at the time. I'm being very sarcastic here. I think it's despicable the way we just trivialized the lives of the Japanese, and it just sort of like, oh well. I mean, if we had invaded Japan, we would have lost 1 million Americans. Well, we weren't going to invade Japan. Japan was going to surrender. Yeah. But even then, there's no justification for dropping atomic bombs on cities and slaughtering humans, just like there's no justification for firebombing cities. I know, the reality is we killed more Japanese firebombing Tokyo than we did in the Nagasaki and Hiroshima attacks, but that doesn't make it right.
So Russia is not trying to, take over the land of Ukraine. They're just trying to denazify and demilitarize, right? Because I believe that a lot of people think that Russia is trying to take over or get land or whatever, but that's not the real reason, right? It's for the denazification and demilitarization.
Look, Russia from 2014 till 2022, Russia specifically avoided entertaining any thought of having the Donbass break away from Ukraine. And despite the fact that Crimea was predominantly Russian, The Russians from 1992 until 2014 accepted that Crimea was part of Ukraine. They weren't happy about it, but they accepted it. So the idea that Russia was seeking to go to war to acquire, Russia annexed Crimea because the new Nazi dominated government declared war on ethnic Russians. So the Russians preempted that. And Russia provided support to the Donbass because the neo-Nazis were slaughtering ethnic Russians in the Donbass, as they did in Odessa, jamming 150 people into a trade union building, setting on fire, killing 48 of them. So the idea that Russia started this conflict to take Ukrainian territory is absurd. But once the Ukrainian government shows itself to be a terrorist government terrorizing ethnic Russians, Vladimir Putin said repeatedly that he has a moral obligation to look out for the totality of the Russian nation, and the nation is defined by the people, not the territory. And so there is a large part of Ukraine that many people identify as Novaya Russia, which stretches from Odessa through Kherson, Zaporizhia, up into the Donbass and includes Kharkov. And I think Russia's made it clear to the Ukrainians that if they continue to extend this fight, that they're going to lose those territories, that Russia will never again allow ethnic Russians to be governed by Ukrainians. So is it about land? No, but one of the consequences of this conflict is that Ukraine could, in fact, lose. They've already lost 20% of their land. They could lose 20% more. So nearly 50% of Ukraine could disappear. And once it's absorbed into Russia, it's never coming back. It's literally never coming back.
Yeah. Okay, my next question, perhaps away from Ukraine, but still part of the overall geopolitical situation. Will China make a move on Taiwan?
General Minahan seems to think so. He's ordered all of his C-17 pilots to somehow become experts in pistol marksmanship, to empty a clip into a target, 7-meter target, aim at the head. I don't know if anybody here qualified on a military range using the 9mm pistol or the 45 caliber prior to that. I'm fairly certain part of the qualification wasn't emptying the clip into the head. Pretty sure that you got most points aiming center mass. It just shows the stupidity of this guy. China could move on Taiwan if the circumstances deteriorate to such an extent that China feels it has no choice to do so, otherwise have Taiwan declare independence and be treated as an independent nation by the rest of the world. China wants a peaceful solution to this. They've said their primary goal is a nonviolent solution. They want simply, one state, two systems, meaning that all Taiwan has to do is say, yeah, we're part of China. Then they get to be whatever they are right now. Then nothing's going to change. The flag changes. That's about it. But China won't allow Taiwan to declare independence or be treated as an independent entity, which is why the visit of Nancy Pelosi last year was such a dangerous thing. Why the proposed visit by Kevin McCarthy, now is such a dangerous thing. It's why the continued talk about America coming to the defense of Taiwan is a dangerous thing, because we are literally setting in motion actions which China will eventually have no choice but to interpret as representing a decisive move by the collective West to bring about an independent Taiwan. And then China will take Taiwan. Is it inevitable? No. But could it happen? Absolutely. We'll see what the future holds. Hopefully, saner minds will prevail.
I'll follow another question.
Sorry.
I'm sure that was the best question ever asked.
Yeah, he was
Question.
having a conversation with himself.
I was looking at the other screen, so I wasn't paying attention to you guys. All right, sorry. Okay, so the question I saw in the chat was, could Russia use America's enemies as their own proxies and essentially play America's game and kind of, asymmetrically attack America without nuclear, escalation, but in a more conventional sense using proxies like, America does best?
Look, during the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union played this zero-sum game of global competition, where both sides did that. Russia isn't the Soviet Union, and people need to understand. I'm not saying that the Russians aren't capable of doing things like that. I'm not saying that Russia doesn't do things like that. I mean, every nation looks out for its national security interests in the way that they deem best suited to their needs and objectives. But Russia isn't looking to be a global superpower like the Soviet Union was. This isn't a battle of ideologies, communism versus capitalism. Russia simply wants to be allowed to stand on its own 2 feet and be a member of the world that in a way that respects and recognizes its stature. What it is. It's a great nation. It's the biggest landmass. It has some of the greatest, resources attached to it. Advanced, economy and industry. It is a global power, not a superpower. It's not trying to compete with America in terms of power projection, but it wants to have its seat at the table. The Russians and the Chinese have also said that they don't want to replace America with America. And what I mean by that is you're going to sit here and call America a global empire and a global, imperialism, all this kind of stuff, rules-based international order. Okay, you want to replace that with what? Something that is the exact mirror image of that? No, that's not what they want. The Russians and the Chinese are shooting for a multipolar world. Now, in a way, multipolarity is a proxy for what we just talked about, but it's done using the natural inclinations of other nations as opposed to Russia going in and triggering conflict. One of the biggest threats to the continuation of American global hegemony is the loss of dominance of the petrodollar. So Russia doesn't need to go and fund guerrilla economists around the world. They just have to sit back and tell the other world, yeah, we're looking for a replacement to the dollar too. And what can we do to help make this a reality? That's why what Russia is doing with Turkey to come up with some sort of gold-based currency used for trade. Iran, Russia's now just opened up their own version of the SWIFT banking so that Iran's economy is tied to the Russian economy in terms of banking. And Russia's going to be doing this around the world. This is the economic equivalent of proxy war, proxy conflict. But it's not proxy in terms of Russia using other people to serve Russian interests. It's Russia working with other people to serve everybody's interests. That's what a multipolar world is, as opposed to the American singularity.
Okay. Are there any questions in the chat? Chat, we'll give you the floor now. Ask the next person to ask a good question. We'll get answered. So up to you, chat. There's 164 people watching. So
I've never had more than 3 watch me.
Oh wow. Okay. Come on, chat. Don't be shy. Ask away.
They're all here for Scott.
Yeah. It's a one-time chance. Come on, ask away. Otherwise, I shall ask the next question. What have we got? Just admit, maybe we can solve the problem. Okay, well, whilst we're waiting, I'll ask the next question. Now I know we kind of touched on this in our previous interview. This is relating to Article 5. So, but this would be instead of Russia, so a false flag like I think they attempted with in Poland back in was it December when they pointed that missile deliberately. It was no accident, as Scott quite um, explained in quite detail. So it was clearly no accident. So that was a very, I think it was a false flag attempt. So if a NATO army were to enter Western Ukraine, so let's say that NATO manages to persuade, let's say Poland is the most likely, as well as maybe a few other belligerents, and then Russia attacks that army, will that trigger Article 5?
In order to be a NATO army entering Ukraine, NATO would have to convene under Article 4 and determine that there was a situation in Western Ukraine that was worthy of, that represented such a security risk that NATO would officially embark on a military mission. And then Article 5 would be triggered because these would be NATO troops operating anywhere in the world, which is what Article 5 talks about. It's not just about the boundaries, but it's about troops operating in the world. But then in order to do that, they'd have to know that they're going to be confronted by Russia, or at least have the potential to. So it would be an extraordinarily dangerous escalation. And Russia has been in the business of escalation management from the very beginning. So if you take a look at what Russia is doing right now, they are creating a military reality in Belarus with this joint operational group of forces that has considerable military punch, considerable enough that they'd kick the living you-know-what out of any Polish force that came in from Poland to Western Ukraine. And then the other thing they're doing is I don't believe you're going to see any major thrusts and efforts to rapidly de-escalate. I think Russia is going to be, from between now and the end of summer, this pressure cooker that's going to be grinding down. And the reason why is that I don't think Russia wants to confront NATO with a sudden emergency. I mean, the worst thing that could happen right now is the collapse of the NATO military in a precipitous fashion that created a vacuum of uncertainty that NATO would feel tempted to fill for whatever security reasons. So I think the Russians are going to manage this conflict in a way that ultimately achieves them the victory, but they're going to try and time the collapse of the Ukrainian military in a proper moment where it's, it'll have been predicted and nobody's going to be taken by surprise. NATO will have had a chance to come up with alternate policy options, etc. So I'm hopeful that Russia will mitigate any potential for that. The Russians are aware of everything. It's not just the Polish moving into Western Ukraine. It's the Romanians moving into Moldova, things of that nature. The danger of the Baltics trying to flex their muscles in the Gulf of Finland and shutting down rail transportation into Kaliningrad. These are all potential points of escalation. And I think the Russians I think their best strategy is just keep winning. Just keep winning. You don't have to win big. This war will be over at some point in time, but what you don't want to do is do anything that upsets the current balance of power, the current equilibrium that exists. And Russia moving too fast, too soon could do something like that.
There's a question on the screen. It says, would Russia consider taking everything west of Dnipro River and Odessa a win, or do they think that Eastern Ukraine will continue to be U.S./NATO puppet state and continue with war?
I think the question, I think the Eastern should read Western. So that might be a mistake because Eastern Ukraine is ethnic Russians. So that would be a Russian puppet state. The Western Ukraine is the one that could become I don't think Russia wants to take everything west of the Dnipro River. One, it's horrific manpower requirements. It would require another 500, 600, 700,000 troops to do this. And I just don't think Russia is looking to mobilize that many people. I do think taking Odessa and removing Ukraine's ability to access the Black Sea is a viable objective, one that could be undertaken if Ukraine is unwilling to terminate this conflict on Russia's, in a way that is conducive to Russian overall objectives. But taking all of Western Ukraine, again, I don't see that being a Russian military objective. I see as the political objective the collapse of the Zelensky government, which would trigger a general collapse of support for the Western Ukrainian-based ultranationalists, and that resolving the issue of Stepan Bandera's continued viability politically through various political parties would become an internal Ukrainian problem, where a new Ukrainian government assisted by the Russians would be in charge of suppressing that. I think the last thing Russia wants to do is occupy Western Ukraine.
I think what Scott's already been with us for a little bit over an hour. I don't know.
Yeah, unfortunately, I got to get going pretty soon. Yeah.
Okay, I just have one more question, and then if Angry Warhawk wants to plug your book, can you say something about his book after he answers the question, please?
Yeah.
Okay. Elena, USA Live wants to know if Russia denazifies Ukraine, will it then rebirth in the Baltic states, which are supporting Ukraine ideology, or another European country where Nazis will flee to? Then what?
That's a very good question. What happens when Nazi ideology goes into diaspora? Well, it already has. I mean, if we take a look, we see Chrystia Freeland in Canada, senior Ukrainian government official. Some people have tapped her to be the next Secretary General of NATO. She is the granddaughter of a Nazi propagandist, and she openly supports the ideology of Stepan Bandera. Here in the United States, we have camps that are where children go every summer to be indoctrinated into the ideology of Stepan Bandera. Australia does the same thing. So it's possible that this ideology would flee to receptive venues. Poland is questionable, even though Poland has this rabid anti-Russian posturing. Bandera's people slaughtered 110,000 Poles in the Volyn massacres in 1943-44, and the Poland hasn't forgiven them that. So I can't imagine Poland saying, "Yeah, you guys are going to be safe here." The Baltics are another question. Unfortunately, the Baltic states have shown that denazification after post-World War II didn't happen. They are, espousing. They're attacking the Soviet war memorials. They're erasing the role played by the Soviet Union. They're treating the Soviet Union as evil occupiers, which means that the Germans were actually the good guys. So there's sort of this warped, reality, reimagining of reality taking place in the Baltics, where the Germans were defending the Balts from the evil Soviet communism. And this promotes a resurrection of neo-Nazi ideology, because in the same way that the Western Ukrainians have taken the Galician division of the Waffen-SS and now say that was really just a nationalist division. It wasn't really the Waffen-SS, just the Ukrainian nationalists. You see in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia a glorification of the various Waffen-SS units that were comprised of Lithuanians, Estonians, and Latvians. So, yeah, it's a problem, and unfortunately, it can only be solved by Europe, unless Russia wants to go to war against all Europe and cleanse it all. I don't think that's Russia's objectives.
Okay. Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
The recent strikes in Iran. What's your take on that?
Good question.
Well, first of all, according to the Iranians, they weren't that good, meaning that they didn't accomplish what they were out to accomplish. I don't see Iran overreacting, because that's sort of what people want them to do. But it is worrisome because you have the Ukrainians insinuating that they were somehow involved. They said, we warned you. If you provide weapons to Russia, this will happen. Well, was Ukraine behind this? Were the Israelis behind this? Were the Azerbaijanis behind this? Who was behind this? But I just see this as part of expanding the scope and scale of this conflict. Now, any nation that provides material support becomes a target, which is interesting because when are the NATO countries going to be struck down? I mean, because you don't have to agree with what Iran's doing, but you do have to understand that Iran providing Russia with military equipment is no different from the United States, Germany, France, anybody else providing Ukraine with military equipment. And if you are going to legitimize the striking of Iran in retaliation, I guess we get the bomb Rheinmetall AG and blow them off the face of the earth because they produce Leopard tanks. It's a dangerous escalation.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's all, folks. Let me just.
We're gonna plug your book in.
Yeah. So I have a very interesting book here. It's called Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika, Arms Control, and the End of the Soviet Union. So written by Scott Ritter, who we have with us today, of course. I'm in the middle of reading it. I haven't finished it yet, but it's very interesting. If you're, it answers. It helps to read books like this because then it helps understand what's going on today.
Yes.
Because
Makes sense.
You need to educate yourself with history to really get the full picture, and that gives you a much better understanding of the world today, the conflict we're seeing in Ukraine. Because this didn't just happen spontaneously. This didn't just one day, the war in Ukraine. Oh, just for no reason, someone wanted to invade. No, this goes way back. And yeah, I mean, this what you mentioned earlier, Scott, about Russia is not the Soviet Union. So that's an extremely important point. I actually did a video on that. I put it in the chat. I made a video about that back, I don't know, March, April last year. But yeah, so yeah, highly recommend this book. Scott, where can people find it?
Well, you can go to my website, which is scottritterextra.com, and you can order the book from there. That helps us out a little bit too. Also, I think soon we're going to have a mechanism where people can order autographed copies of the book. So that'll be up. But if you want to bypass that, you can go straight to the publisher, claritypress.com, or Barnes & Nobles and Amazon sell it as well.
And then I'll also put on the description box a link how they can go to Telegram and watch your shows and also order your book.
Yeah, the scotritterextra.com, you can go there and everything I do gets posted there. Anything I write gets posted there. There's no paywall, so everything's accessible. However, if people were inclined to support me so that I can continue to come on and do podcasts like this instead of going off and having to dig trenches and roof houses, you can subscribe or contribute. So I appreciate it if anybody does it.
Okay, and then I think in March you have something going on, and I'm making plans to go see you in March, so I'll bring you a little gift.
Don't worry about it. Yeah, March is I think the 18th and 19th in the Oakland area. I'll be doing some stuff. Yeah, March 18th, 19th. The specific schedule hasn't been worked out. And we're also looking at something in. I saw somebody from Texas. So we're looking at something in Austin area. I don't have exact dates for that yet. And I know I'll be in Houston at the end of May. I'll be speaking at a conference there, and maybe we can find a way to do some speaking engagements there. So we're trying to get out and about and go to people. So, because I tell you, as much fun as this is, it's more fun. We have this concept we're working on called, it's derived from something that's called pubology. It's basically getting in a bar and sit down with some pizza and some beer. I'll talk, and then we'll just take questions. And I've done it in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It was very successful. I think Jeff Norman, who I work closely with, he's talking about renaming it, rebranding as American Drink Tank. So drink tank instead of think tank. I don't know. It's a little too cute, but anyways, we plan on doing stuff like that. So hopefully, while I enjoy doing this and we'll continue to do this, maybe we can we can meet over a beer someplace and do it that way. So
when are you coming to England, Scott?
I don't know. I have to make sure I'm not arrested at the airport the second I come in. I've been very harsh on the British government, so we'll see.
Yes, for those that don't know, I'm in California, Scott's in New York, and Angry Warhawk is in England. So we're trying to get around.
I want to thank you guys for inviting me on. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to working with you again sometime down the road.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And then I'll send you the link. I'll send you the link, Scott, and we'll appreciate you, everything you do for us.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Pleasure, Scott. Take care, and hope to see you soon. Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Bye. Have a good day. Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.
All right.
Well, I'm gonna go ahead and do all that, and then I'm gonna go ahead and end the broadcast now. Thank you to everybody that was here supporting, watching, and liking. Like my sister said, likes are free. So we just want to thank you, everybody from Real True Talk and Angry Warhawk, and we'll probably do this again in about another month. Thank you. Yeah,
we hit 100 just before we go. We hit 100 and I think 165. We peaked that, which is pretty good. So yeah, thanks. Hope everyone enjoyed that. We'll be doing more of these. Maybe we could do one where we take more questions from the chat and ask Scott directly. So, but yeah, we'll let everyone know when the next when we do the next live stream. So yeah, this has been good. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, friends and family on YouTube world. And we're out. Thank you so much. Okay. Have a good day, everybody. Have a blessed day. Thank you, bro. Appreciate you. You too. Thanks, Juan.